set my attitude at 0 and see what happens.
Okay.
Make adjustments from there. Yeah. It's kind of strange. Why is it so tiny? There we go. Wayne Chang. Good morning, Wayne. Good morning. All right, everybody, we're going to start. 4 of us, small but mighty, means you get personalized instruction this morning. So here's the dual-edged warm-up. First, what's required to descend below DA or MDA? What's required to descend below DA or MDA? And 2, this is like the bonus question this morning. Why is Torrance VFR and Long Beach isn't? Why is Torrance VFR? Beautiful. This is like a rare 7 a.m. in June. We could have been flying right now. Why? Since basically the sun came up. Yeah. Why is it VFR in Torrance right now, but IFR in Long Beach? The warm-up's always open book. You can chat with each other. You can think about it. I'm going to take attendance while y'all are working on that.
You think something to do like the distance thing? Like, you know how in like a chart? Yeah, only goes like 5 nautical miles. And Long Beach is like more.
No, but I mean, the 4-5 wouldn't straight up tell us the answer. So I'm thinking
it'll tell you the weather.
Yeah.
You could look at, like, for example,
well, there's no meter for storm.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too.
Yeah, why is
I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
There's a reason I put this warm up. There's a few things here that are interesting about this morning.
So does that mean we're able to take off if we want to, but the students in Long Beach have to wait until it clears up?
That's exactly what that means. Unless they want to file and take off IFR, so they're not allowed to do it in a sling. You can't go into IMC in a sling.
We should FaceTime you more.
I know.
Look at that.
Actually, that's interesting. According to, this could be another warm-up. According to Sling Safety Policies and Procedures Guide, when are you allowed to use your phone while flying the airplane? That's not what it says.
Oh, crap. I didn't
probably never.
It's a Sling rule, but you should know this because you all have the safety policies and procedures memorized. The rule, it says you are only allowed to use your phone when you're not flying the airplane and when the safety of flight is not compromised.
Awesome.
So if you give the controls to, if you want to take video, safety procedure says hand the controls to your instructor or whoever's in your right seat. If you're the only pilot on board, the safety policies and procedures said you're not allowed to use your phone. You are not allowed to use your phone when you are, except obviously for like for flight or something else like that. But like taking video, taking pictures, FaceTiming our friends in Long Beach to gloat about our VFR conditions, only when you are not at the controls.
Loophole. Put it on autopilot.
Nope, you're still at the controls. Oh, I like it. Okay, cool. Let's do the warm up. What is required to descend below DA or MDA? What's one thing, Sophie? Love it. This is a thing that people often forget in a check ride, right? You have to be able to descend from your position to be stabilized approach all the way down using normal maneuvers. How do we define normal maneuvers when it comes to like our descent rate?
Not more than 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
No more than 1,000 feet per minute. And what do we? How do we define like our lateral stuff versus like normal maneuvers? What does that mean? What's up?
Constant rate.
It doesn't necessarily have to be constant rate. Just no more than 1,000 feet per minute. But like, what kinds of stuff are we not going to do in stabilized descent? S-turns, slips, right? None of that in IFR. Yeah.
Standard return. Consider as the abnormal.
Yes, that's correct. We would not there. You would never do a turn beyond standard rate. There are times when you would do less than standard rate, but there's not a time when you do more than standard rate. That's to protect us, right? Like we are flying purely by reference to the instrument. So all of these other maneuvers, steep turns, S-turns, slips, they all are visual maneuvers. So we can't do them in IFR. Yeah. Okay, Sophie, that was one. Good. Chris, tell us another requirement. What's required to descend below DA or MDA?
Shouldn't
Thank you. Oh my God, it's been a whole weekend. We haven't talked about 9175 for 3 days. Good. Okay. What's another thing that it says? We've had flight. You had be able to descend with normal maneuvers, right? Stabilized descent. What's another requirement that 91.175 says?
So I'm just reading.
You can.
Describe.
By the way, in a check ride, you're allowed to do the same thing. That's why I'm trying to hammer into you 91.175, right? Because if you somehow freeze up and forget, you can say to the examiner, well, I know it's a 91.175. They're going to be like, you should have that memorized because you're not going to look up 91.175 in the flight while you're like trying to descend and do an instrument approach, but you're not going to fail. Okay. So what was the next one?
So it says the DA, DH, or MD described for the pilot in command.
You cannot go below the D. So this is saying, what is the DA? For the purposes of this section, when the procedure being used provides for and requires the use of a DA or MDA,
So
it's the highest of the following.
So
What's
we
on
must-
good morning?
we
What's
must
on the
have-
chart? That's good. Flight visibility, exactly, right? So this is the first one. This is Charlie, right? It's the aircraft's position to descend and land. That's what Sophie said. Flight visibility is what? Morning.
to be able to see them.
Has to be what's prescribed in the procedure, right? So it has to be what's prescribed on the plate. That's different than what's on the ATIS. It's different than the RVR. It's what flight visibility is defined as what you can see from the cockpit, right? Like your forward visibility is flight visibility.
So when it comes to that, you know how our standard is, what is it, like 2 statute miles we need to be able to see, right?
Well, VFR is 3. VFR is 3. And then for this, the purposes of 91.75, it's whatever's specified on the approach plate.
So let's say the approach plate is 2,
Yeah.
and then for some reason you still haven't gotten a sense of what is 2 statute mile, and then you decide to land.
Yeah.
And it's like 1. Would
Yeah.
you get in trouble?
You could get in trouble. The reason for these visibilities is to keep us safe from obstacles and traffic, right? Whenever we have like something weird on the plate, like last week we were looking at the VOR Alpha into Brown, and we were like, why is the visibility 2 3/4 miles? That sounds like a lot. That's almost VFR visibilities, right? What kind of a whack instrument approach is this, where it's barely giving us better than VFR? Like I paid for better. I went to instrument class for 5 weeks because the VOR was so far and this approach point was so far from the runway that was required. So there could be many reasons, but it's mostly to keep us safe. So don't do it. I always, if you have to ask the question, would I get in trouble for ... It's probably, I mean, you can always ask that, and you should ask that. That's part of the risk management process that we go through. But always kind of keep in the back of your mind, if you're asking that question, ask yourself next, is it safe? Right? What you're asking yourself first is it legal? Would I get in trouble? Then ask yourself, is it safe? Does it make sense? Is it my personal minimums? Does it make sense given all the information that I have around me? But flight visibility required. Okay. I'm gonna ask for you, Casey, right?
Yep.
The last part. So for what's required to descend below DA and MDA, we have normal maneuver, stabilized descent. We have prescribed flight visibility or better. What's the third thing we need to descend below DA or MDA?
Sorry, repeat that.
What's the third thing we need in order to descend below DA or MDA on an instrument approach?
Runway lights inside.
Okay, that's one, right? What's another one? Moon?
9 more things.
There's 9 more things, right? Like we have I sort of use this is Charlie 3, 91.175 Charlie 3. Right, there's 10 things. I call it runway or runway environment. That includes things like the lights, the pavement, the paint, the markings, all the rest. But there's one sort of asterisk in this. If we only see the approach lighting system, then what can we do? Do you remember this sort of like asterisk part?
I remember it, but not exactly.
You can just read it here.
The approach light system, except the pilot not described,
May not descend.
may not descend
Yeah.
below 100 feet above the, thank you. Above the touchdown zone elevation, using the approach lights as a reference, unless red terminating bars or red side row bars are also distinctly visible and identical.
Exactly, right? So like if I'm coming into 29 right at Torrance and I see the rabbits, right? The strobe lights that are like, come land here. Here's the center line. Come land here. Please, it's IFR. I'm trying to save you. Come land here. And that's all you see. You can't see any of the lights or paints or markings. You can descend below DA and MDA, but only as low as 100 feet above touchdown zone elevation. So touchdown zone elevation at Torrance is, I forget exactly for 29 right, call it 100 feet. It's whatever it says on the plate. Then you could descend to 200 feet, but no lower until you have one of the other 9 things in sight.
So it's technically, you need to have the rabbits
Yeah.
plus one of the other things.
No, you only need to have the approach lighting system in place to descend below MDA or DA. You can descend below minimums, right? Primary minimums, if you see the rabbits or any part of the approach lighting system, you can. But in order to land or in order to descend below 100 feet above touchdown zone elevation, you got to have the rest of the runway in sight. Basically, if you're like down and you're at 200 feet here, as an example, right? We're saying maybe if touchdown zone elevation on the runway is 100 feet, and you get down to 200, and you still are only seeing the approach lights, go around. Like you can't go lower than that. 100 feet is really low. Like if you think about it, 100 feet, like in a sling, if you stalled at 100 feet, and you'd probably still live. Like it's really low, you know? Don't try that. Don't try that. I regret saying that out loud. Okay, we're not even gonna think about that anymore. Cool. 91,175, 91,175, 91,175. Okay, and here's the bonus question, which I couldn't help myself. Why is Torrance VFR, while Long Beach is IFR this morning? Here's why I put this up here. One, I want you all to be curious pilots. To me, what has separated out some of the best pilots I've flown with and some of the best instructors I've had is a sense of curiosity, right? So it's not just curiosity of like, how do I get a good score on my written, which we're all curious about. Fortunately, it's a good answer. It's called Shepherd Air. But like broadly, like you're walking to the airport, like we all have some kind of walk, right, from our parking to get here. What's going on at the airport? I use that time to think about what are the NOTAMs. That's when I'm looking at the NOTAMs while on my walk. That's sort of like my routine. And I'm using my Mark II eyeball weather observation to say, regardless of what the ADA says, what do I see? And it's just interesting to me that today I saw something I don't usually see, which is beautiful VFR here, total IFR at Long Beach. So spoiler alert, I don't know the real answer to this. The point of me asking this is because I want you to ask yourself this question, but let's brainstorm. What are some possibilities of why it would be VFR here, or starting with why is it IFR at Long Beach? What kind of weather phenomenon are they having at Long Beach right now?
Probably convection fog, marine layer.
Our old friend advection fog, marine layer, exactly. That'd be my guess as well. And looking with on my eyeballs, that's what it looked like to me. Is Long Beach still IFR? I know they were at the last days. What are their current weather conditions? Okay. Yep.
Miss.
Got it. Yeah. So and have they published a METAR for us yet?
Yes.
Ooh, what do they say?
Scatter visibility when it is.
Where am
I don't believe it. Working outside of the.
Yeah.
KTOA on the 16th, 13:54 Zulu, which is 6:54 a.m. Local was 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes ago. Great.
Checked it like 10 minutes ago and nothing was posted.
Because it's 21 minutes ago from the time of the observation, not the time it was posted. Do you know how they post, how the METAR gets from the tower into ForeFlight? I learned this on a tower tour when it was very IFR a few months ago. I went on a tower tour. We happened to be there while they were cutting the new ATIS. So at Torrance, we do not have an ASOS or an AWAS. We have other weather reporting systems. But the way they report visibility is literally there's a trained observer in the tower who has a chart of various landmarks around. And if they can see that landmark, then they know that the visibility is however much it says on their chart. They can see the flag on that bank building over there. They know that's 2.5 miles. So that's how they know. It's kind of old school here in the Torrance Tower. But what happens is the person either at the ground position or the data position, the data control, forget what they call it, the person who's in charge of the flight plans and the flight following and all that. They're the ones making the ATIS. So they literally pull the weather, like the winds and whatever. They figure out the visibility. They write it down on a strip. They record the ATIS. So the ATIS goes in immediately, right? It's like information, Bravo, whatever. And that's active immediately. Then they hand the strip to the supervisor behind them, who's at a bunch of computers. And the supervisor then manually types that into an FAA computer, which then is what gets it into our ForeFlight. Now, if the supervisor's busy because they're working on other stuff, there could be a few minute delay, or sometimes a 15-minute delay, right?
Right.
Because that supervisor is like, that's the pilots have what they need. We cut the ATIS. Their job is like, there's not a safety issue at that point, right? Yeah, pilots are getting the correct ATIS from listening to the recording, but it's not in ForeFlight because they got to prioritize and they've got a problem or emergency or staffing. They're not going to be there typing it in. That's why, particularly at Torrance, there's a long delay. Many other airports, they have different technology so the person can type it in directly and it goes into ForeFlight really fast. Why did I get on this kick?
The Zulu time.
Yeah, that's why. Yep. If by the way, you can call. There's a phone number in the chart supplement to listen to the ATIS.
Yeah.
So you can always call and listen to the ATIS. If it's not, if your ForeFlight is like it's 68 minutes old, call and listen to the ATIS. Haze scattered. So why is this considered marginal? What about this makes it marginal?
The haze.
Not the haze per se. It's the visibility. Exactly. I forget exactly the visibility, but it's like 3 to 5 miles, I think is considered marginal. Something like that.
Yeah.
And or a ceiling between 1 and 3,000, I think is also.
Yeah.
And is this a ceiling? A scattered 1,000 considered a ceiling?
Only broken.
So it's the visibility that's making it marginal.
So if we see this METAR, and then we go outside,
Yeah.
and outside obviously it looks nice,
Yeah.
we'll still be able to take off. Even
No.
though the METAR says,
The METAR controls. So if the METAR says it's IFR, it's IFR legally.
So I mean, I was looking at the wind speed as well,
Yeah.
because I always think of it as like when the wind is strong.
Yeah.
And just like clear all the blankets away.
There's a written question on this. There's a written question. It says, when will the advection fog clear? There's like a certain wind speed that the FAA says it's going to clear.
15 knots.
15 knots. I don't think that's super exact, but that's what the written says, and that's what it says in the handbooks. Yeah.
But you know.
So yeah, so your hypothesis, oh, maybe there was a stronger wind at Torrance that blew all the advection fog out. Love that theory. Is it borne out by the METAR?
I mean, it was 4 knots at Long Beach, so I don't know if that was the right answer.
Yeah, it's a great theory. I don't think the METAR bears it out. If this was like a 10 knot, 20 knot wind, sure. And then at Long Beach, it's winds calm or winds 5. Yeah, that's right. Somehow we have wind and it cleared out in Long Beach. What's this mean 17/16 when you see
that's the temperature and
temperature dew points? And so what's the temperature dew point spread, the difference between the two? 1 degree Celsius. There's sort of a rule of thumb, 4 degrees, 5 degrees or less, we could have visibility problems. Haze, mist, fog, right? So if I'm looking, for example, at a set of METARs and I want to see a trend, and it's getting the temperature dew point spread is getting smaller and smaller, I'm worried. I'm worried about visibility problems. Yeah, so we have like, it's actually kind of strange in some ways that we have a 1 degree spread in our temperature dew point, and yet we still have 4 miles visibility. That's actually kind of.
Ceiling is VFR.
And ceiling's VFR, that's kind of unusual, right? Let's click over to Long Beach. Ooh, they had a PIREP. That. So the 16th at 6:53 a.m. local, similar winds. What's BR mean?
Mist.
Mist. Brume en français, right? Brume. Mist. Baby rain. Baby rain. Overcast 800. Is that a ceiling?
Yes.
yeah.
Overcast and broken are ceilings.
Wait, you say that's a pirate?
Well, down here is a PIREP. We're gonna look at a second.
Oh.
They also have a 1 degree temperature dew point spread. Altimeter 2990 remarks. What does AO2 mean?
Keep going on. Has to do something with the precipitation.
Yes, it does. Anybody else remember? Yeah, the sensor on the weather station can discriminate or meaning it can determine the difference between different kinds of precipitation. Rain versus snow versus hail versus other kinds of precipitation.
Right.
Right? It knows. Good. And what is SLP 124? Sea level pressure, which is what, Sophie? You're on it.
So,
You got this. Yes. Yes. You do know, you just said it. Say it again. 1012.4, and then what's the units? You remember the units? Millibars, right? 1012.4 millibars, exactly, which is literally, it's just converting 29.90 inches of mercury into millibars, right? Yeah, exactly. Nicely done.
And then that one,
Yeah, what's that one?
you got it, Chris?
nah, dude, like part this is why I also followed the checker. No,
E stands for
Temperature.
temperature.
so is this the?
There's two blocks.
Oh,
This
this
is
is-
a block.
Isn't this like it's like the temperature and dew point, but
Correct.
in a different way.
In a more precise way, okay? So here's the first block I just highlighted, 0172. We already know what the temperature is, right? It told us over here 17. So
17.2.
Celsius. And then what's the dew point with more exact?
15.2.
Correct, right? So especially when the temperature dew point spread is close, having this level of extra precision can be helpful, potentially in our decision making. I mean, in our position, we can't fly an IMC, and we might be worried about icing or something else, visible moisture due to icing, but 17.2 and 15.6. So what's the exact temperature dew point spread down to 1/10 of a degree? 17.2 minus 15.6. Now it's mental math and it's Monday morning. I'm really pushing this here.
2.8.
6.
15.6, 16.6 would be 1. So it's 1.6. So we're getting closer to 2. Okay. Matter that much for our purposes? Probably not, but it's fun. Now here's a pi rep, right? This was already, well, actually, let's decode it ourselves.
Yeah.
What's the first?
That's the location of.
Nope, it's the closest airport to the location where it was. So they're always going to tell you first the closest airport to where it was. Good. Now, what is UA? Non-urgent. What would urgent pi rep be? UUA. And the next block. So now it tells you the location. It could also be SLI 36010, which would be the 360 radial of SLI at 10 miles, right? Good. Over Long Beach. Good morning. What's this? TM? Which is what time local?
So it's like 7 on the.
Correct. This morning.
But
Standard time. Yep.
7.
7:10 a.m. local. Good. At what altitude?
Flight that. Is that 2,000?
Yeah, it's in hundreds of feet. So 2,000 feet over Long Beach. What is this? TP?
Or that the type of.
Type of aircraft. Does anybody know what a CL30 is? There's the official FAA way. You just ask Google. I don't know. It's a Bombardier Challenger 300 business jet. Cool. So is that that's the reason it's important to look at the type is because, right, if they're, for example, reporting icing or turbulence, we're much maybe different size than they are. So that's why it's important to know what the type is. Cool. And then what is this? Sky condition. Overcast at what altitude?
1,300.
Yes.
Top at 1,500.
This is the most important part of this pi rep, right? They're telling us how thick the marine layer is, right? How thick is the marine layer? 200 feet. Great. Great. I only have to fly an actual IMC for 200 feet before I pop through. Love that for a Monday morning. And then RM stands for remarks. What is DURC? The opposite of DURC would be DURD. The DUR is one word and the C is the other. DUR stands for during.
During climb.
During climb. DURD during descent. So here's what happened. This Bombardier Challenger, gorgeous business jet. Wow, look at that. Gotta have a type rating for that sucker. It took off from Long Beach at 7:09 a.m. And on the climb out, it was obviously IFR, right? So it was on IFR flight plan. on the climb out before Long Beach Tower set. Long Beach Tower is like, you know, before report cloud bases and tops of Able. Cool. Challenger, whatever. Contact SoCal approach. Do you have a top bases and tops report? Yeah, bases at 1,300, tops at 1,500, over to departure, Challenger, whatever. And that's how they would get that PIREP. I don't know exactly the rules, but ATC is required during IFR conditions to get regular PIREPs on things like cloud tops and bases. I don't know exactly. It's in their control of men, not in ours. But they regularly will query pilots about this.
So they'll ask us to, huh?
They might, yeah.
I think it was on Friday, I was doing the little ground session,
Yeah.
and then the guy got a random pirate from like Arizona,
Uh-huh.
and then the type was a sling.
Yeah. There you go. We love it. We love to see our compatriots in Arizona sending PIREPs. Cool. So back to our warm up, and then we'll move on here. I just right that the real thing is that we don't know exactly why. All we know is that there's advection fog at Long Beach in a way that there's not at Torrance. Maybe the wind changed here. Maybe there's a phenomenon that they call reverse clearing, right? Where actually the coast clears first the fog before the inland does. It's a little more rare. Usually we see the inland clear and then get to the coast, but we might have a reverse clearing situation today. The point is, even if we don't know, we notice it and we notice that it's unusual, and then we become curious about it. That's what I want for y'all, for all of us. Cool. All right, and we got to do some little decoding here of METARs and whatnot. Awesome. All right, so here's our plan for today. The plan for the week, it's review week, right? Today, we're gonna do requirements for the IFR rating. So I want to go over 61, 65, as well as part 141, and let's see what y'all. 2, we're gonna go over logging approaches and the rules for that. Along with that, just like logging in general. I know we talked a little bit about it, like for a hot minute last week. 61.
That's different from
61 to 51.
big sets, right?
Correct, different than currency. And what I'm talking about here is the requirements to get your rating, right? Like what the DP is going to look at in your logbook for your aeronautical knowledge, experience, and skills. 3, we're going to talk about the ACS, instrument ACS. And that's probably all we're going to have time for today. Tomorrow, if we do have time, then always this week, and if any extra time, we'll just do a briefing approach, because that's fine. A lot of skills go into briefing approach. And then if we have really extra time, we'll do a cross-country plan. Tomorrow, mock arcs and holds face check. Wednesday, mock approaches face check. Thursday and Friday, mock oral ground. So what I'm going to do on Thursday and Friday is assign you all a cross-country to plans in advance. We're not going to, you're not going to have to turn it in. I'm not going to grade it. But in order for the scenario to be realistic for a check ride, I'm going to give you a cross-country. Also, how we're going to work these mock check rides and mock face checks is it's going to be chill, folks. Like, this is mostly a way for us to identify things we need to review. So we're going to be pressing pause a lot and like reviewing stuff, just like we did with the weather right now. But just to make it sort of like a little more fair and make sure everybody gets a chance to participate, everybody will get assigned numbers. And I'm just going to use a random number generator. So I'll have a question, random number generate. If you don't know, you can pass. This is a chill, right? We're all trying to help each other out here. But that's what we're going to do for the review periods and the mock rides.
That's great.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm excited about it. Cool. All right, so let's first of all look at the requirements for the instrument rating. How many of y'all are doing 141? Chris, you're thinking about it, right? You're thinking about 141?
Right now I'm
You're 61, I know right now. Leah, Paul, Wayne, are any of you doing 141?
I'm 141.
Lee, I thought at least one of you was 141. Okay, great. So we're gonna go over both. Here's the other reason I want to go over 141. There are actually some pretty significant advantages to 141 in the instrument flying. So we're gonna look at those together. Let's start with 61 though. 6165 is the reg that has all of our requirements. You have to have a private pilot certificate. You have to be able to have aviation English. You have to receive and log ground training from an authorized instructor to accomplish a home study course of training for the aeronautical knowledge test. So you have to have an endorsement that you were authorized to take the written. How do you get that? What's one way you could get that? From your instructor. Your instructor's only going to give that to you if they did the training or that you prove to them you did a home study course. Right? If like any of you asked me for that, I would need to see more proof that you've done some kind of home study course or that you've come to every single one of these classes, for example.
Also,
What's another way? The more classic way.
Kings can visit you.
Have John King sign your logbook. Join the legions and generations of aviators who have an endorsement from John King. Yeah, exactly, right? Like finish King schools, and it gives you the endorsement. Yeah. Or any other kind of online ground school. Cool. Receive a logbook or training record endorsement from an authorized instructor certifying that the person is prepared to take the required knowledge test. You have to have an endorsement saying that you're prepared for the test. You usually will get that. There's a ground. Sling gives each of us 5 grounds for each rating. The last ground is the check ride prep ground, and that's typically where your instructor will give you that endorsement. Let me pause though for a second. Part of the reason I want to go over this with you all is because, yeah, your instructor should know, but instructors are humans and we're busy and we sometimes make mistakes. It's your logbook, it's your check ride. You should know exactly all the requirements so that if, say, you get to that check ride ground and you're almost done and you're like, hey, do I need some endorsements? Yeah, some endorsements. Cool, let's go. You can be in charge of your own, like, own your destiny, folks. Be pilot in command of your own check ride. Pass the required knowledge test. So anybody taken it yet? Cool. Remember what's my recommendation? Anybody remember my recommendation?
2 weeks off to complete the
Not necessarily off. I would still fly, right?
Oh, yeah,
Still fly, but pick 2 weeks in your schedule when you're like, okay, I could spend an hour or two every day. Get Shepherd, pay your $45, get your $5 discount, save the year with Sling. Schedule it. Schedule your test, and then backwards plan and follow the Shepherd method to the letter. You'll get 90% or better. Yep, good. Pass the required practical test on the area of operations listed in paragraph C in an airplane, helicopter, or blah, blah, or a full flight simulator. Can we take our check rides in our advanced simulator? No. Aeronautical knowledge test. Aeronautical knowledge, this is Bravo. Person who applies for instrument rating must receive and log ground training from an authorized instructor or accomplish home study course on the following: FARs, the appropriate flight operations under the AIM, air traffic control system procedures, IFR navigation approaches by use of nav systems, use of IFR en route and instrument approach procedure charts, procurement of weather and forecasts, safe and efficient operations, recognition of critical weather and wind shear avoidance, aeronautical decision making and judgment, and crew resource management, including crew communication and coordination, or in our case, single crew resource management, where we're still accessing all the tools at our disposal within the airplane and outside the airplane as well. So you actually have to have logged ground training. This is the thing that's important to note. You have to have ground entries that say 6165 Bravo 1 through 10. The DPE will be looking for that. You don't have that, no check ride. So that's another reason why Slim gives us 5 grounds per rating. The last one is check ride prep. The one before that is a final phase check prep. Then you get 3 other grounds with your flight instructor. I recommend use those when you have a flight that gets canceled because of weather. Just say, hey, can we turn this into a ground? And then for that ground session, you need to be endorsed and ask for it if your instructor doesn't give it to you, something in 6165 Bravo. And by the end, before you go to your check ride, you have to have a line that says you got, not an endorsement, a line in your logbook that says 6165 Bravo 1 through 10, or at least, all the elements. They don't have to be all at once, right? You and your instructor, you get 3 grounds in addition to the 2 prep grounds. So you can space them out, but you do need to have those listed in your logbook. Make sense? Don't get to your check ride and not be able to start because you didn't get the log to ground training. Charlie, flight proficiency. You must have training in the following: pre-flight prep, pre-flight procedures, ATC clearances procedures, flight by reference instruments, nav systems, instrument approaches, instrument procedures, and post-flight procedures. When you're doing your simulator sessions and your flights, your instructor is signing off 61, or should be signing off 6165 Charlie, and then whatever you did. Here's what I would do. I would figure out what we did. And in my comments, when I send the log to my instructor, I put it. Again, you be in charge of your logbook. It's your logbook. You don't necessarily have to just rely only on your instructor. Your instructor's doing 8 flights a day sometimes, right? Like it, or well, 8, but it's they're flying all day. At the end of the day, they might not remember. So you remember, you put it in your comments and make sure it's memorialized. But there does need to be some kind of reference every flight to 6165 Charlie if you're part 61. Delta, aeronautical experience. Except as provided in the next paragraph, you must have 50 hours of cross-country time as a pilot in command, of which at least 10 hours must have been in an airplane. All of your cross-country for student pilot days counts. It's 50 hours total. So whether that's dual given, whether that's solo, all of your cross-country time as pilot in command. So actually I take back what I just said. When can you log pilot in command as a student pilot?
Well, you're solo.
When you're solo. So only the cross-country time when you were solo as a student pilot counts. Right, it's
That should
50
only be
hours
like 10
as PIC. Well, you at least did your long cross country as a student solo, right? You at least, so that's, that's a couple hours at least. But the cross country when you were not PIC does not count. Only the cross country when you were PIC. And for the purposes of part 61, what is the definition of cross country? Remember?
50
Take off and land at another airport at least 50 nautical miles straight line distance from your, I think it's greater, it's either at, can't remember if it's greater than or at least. You can look in 91.1 or 61.1, I mean, for definitions. If it's close, make sure you look that up. Of which at least 10 hours have been in an airplane. So if you did 40 hours cross country in a helicopter, cross country PIC in a helicopter, you just have to do 10 in an airplane.
So is the instrument rating for, because the PPL for a helicopter is not the same as an airplane?
Okay, so private is the name of the certificate, right? And then you have a category, class, and type.
Oh, okay.
Category, airplane, rotorcraft, lighter than air, glider. That's the category, right? So you would need to, if you already had a private pilot helicopter or private pilot rotorcraft, they call it, right? Like some of that PIC cross country, you can apply to your instrument rating in an airplane. Yeah. And your instrument rating is specific to the category. So you instrument airplane, instrument helicopter. Because the rules for helicopters are a little different, actually. Same for me as a CFI. My II certificate says instrument airplane, not instrument helicopter. Obviously, I don't have a rotorcraft commercial certificate anyway. Cool. Then, any questions on that? The cross country.
It's more than 50 nautical miles.
More than. Thanks for looking it up. That was 61.1, right? Perfect. Thank you for checking. 2, 40 hours of actual or simulated instrument time in the areas of operations listed that we just looked at up above, of which 15 must have been received from an authorized instructor who holds an instrument airplane rating, and the instrument time includes the following. So first of all, you need 40 hours of actual or simulated. Of those, 15 have to be dual received, right? Instruction. So what about the rest of them?
Solo.
No, you can't do instrument training solo under the hood. Safety pilot, right? You can have a safety pilot for the other time. Now at Sling, if you're in the academy, you've already paid for your hours, just go up with the instructor. I had only, I think, 1 flight with a safety pilot before my check ride. It was like a weekend and my instructor wasn't available. Another person who's actually an instructor at another school, I was like, do you want to be my safety pilot? She'd never been in Sling before. She was like, hell yeah. So like she came along as my safety pilot. But I would say in our circumstance, you're probably just taking up you already paid for it. Like just go up with a II. Yeah. But legally you don't have to. You don't have to. So you've got 40 hours of actual, at least 15 of those are dual received training. 3, oh, by the way, you did a little instrument training in your private pilot world, right? At least 3 hours of flight by reference to instruments. The purpose of that was in case you accidentally go into IMC, you're not going to die, right? You know enough to at least like do a 180 turn, descend, and get out of there. There is an interpretation letter from the FAA that says that counts towards your 40. Eric, the chief instructor, and I had he actually did my logbook review. And he was like, I was like right at 40 basically. And so I concluded that. He's like, I don't know. So I came ready to show the DPE the letters from the FAA if I needed to, but so So if you're close and you're counting your private pilot hours, your private pilot instrument hours, you might want to be prepared to talk about that.
Derek has told me that it needs to be with a double I if you did it in your private though. Do you know about that?
He's probably right. Derek's usually right, so
Yeah,
I'm not
I-
going to contradict him here.
But
I'd have to go back and read the letters. One of the interpretation letters probably says that.
yeah,
Yeah.
but so my understanding is that it's 15 hours of instruction and then 40 hours of like instruments.
It's 40 hours of actual or simulated total,
Yeah.
of which at least 15 has to be instruction.
Yeah, so if it's just 15 hours of, is that what would have to do with the double I?
Yeah,
So the 40 hours doesn't have to be.
no,
Usually.
I see your
it's
point. I see your point.
Yeah.
I see your point. That's good. That's good. I like that. The 15 hours has to be with the double I.
Yeah.
The total 40 does not have to, or the balance doesn't
Yeah.
have to. That's a good point. Okay, good. I like that argument. That makes sense to me.
But in Sling, usually the entire simulated time is with the.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, we don't hire any instructors with that double I here.
Right.
Yep. Okay, so of that 40 hours, 3 hours must be from an authorized instructor in an airplane that is appropriate to the instrument rating within 2 calendar months before the date of the practical test. You're gonna have to get an endorsement certifying this, right? So David Spears, certify that, Casey has had at least 3 hours of training within the previous 2 calendar months. There's an endorsement for that. They don't want you getting rusty before your practical test. 2, instrument flight training on cross-country flight procedures, including 1 cross-country in an airplane with an authorized instructor that is performed under IFR when a flight plan has been filed with an ATC control facility and that involves a flight of at least 250 nautical miles along airways or by vectors from air traffic control. That's what that means. An instrument approach at each airport and 3 different kinds of approaches with the use of navigation systems. A couple of things that have tripped people up recently on this, the long IFR cross-country. It does have to be with an instructor. This is dual received for you all, right? This is with an instructor. Obviously, because you can't file your own flight plan for IFR yet, right? But if you had with an instrument rated private pilot buddy, they don't count for this. It has to be with an authorized instructor. The other thing that people are getting here is performed under instrument flight rules and flown under IFI. There's no requirement of what percentage of this needs to be actual or simulated. It just says performed under instrument flight rules. However, the expectation is that you're basically under the foggles the whole time. That's the expectation. And so the DP is going to be looking for that. Obviously not the takeoff and the approach and from minimums down and all the taxiing. But if you fly from here to Brown, if you go here, Brown, San Bernardino, and Torrance, and the total flight time is 5.5 hours, and you only log 2 hours simulated instrument, this was supposed to be an IFR flight. Why were you only under the hood for 2 of the 5.5 hours? Right? The expectation is that you should be under the hood the whole time, except for the takeoff and from the minimums and down for taxing. Does that make sense? Okay. An instrument approach at each airport and 3 different kinds of approaches with use of navigation systems. So an instrument approach at each airport. Does that mean if I fly from here to Brown and I do the VOR Alpha, which we briefed last week, and I go missed, and then I go to San Bernardino and I fly the ILS runway 6 San Bernardino and I go missed, and then I fly back to Torrance and land, does that fulfill my requirements? Why not?
Because you didn't land at the front.
Correct. Yeah, it doesn't count as cross country, right? Cross country, you just said more than 50 nautical miles. So I gotta land at least once, right? In order for this to count.
So is it 0 nautical mile then? You took off and landed.
Yeah, exactly. That does not under 61.1, under part 61, that does not count as a cross country. For your ATP and other licenses, it does, because that's flight distance, not landing. But for the purposes of part 61, that does not count as a cross country. So you do need to land. Yeah. Cool. 3 different kinds of approaches. There's lots of interpretations on this. The safest way is to do an ILS, an RNAV, and a VOR, right? That there's nobody can complain about that. If for whatever reason you can't do that 3, there's some advisory circulars and interpretations to look at. But, right, strong recommendation, VOR, RNAV, ILS, no DP is gonna, that's unassailable, unassailable. Cool. We're gonna skip Echo because that's for the helicopter rating. We're gonna skip Foxtrot because that's for powered lift rating. Golf. An applicant for a combined private pilot with instrument hates their lives because that's a terrible check ride. We're skipping golf. H, use of full flight simulators and flight training devices. If the instrument time was provided by an authorized instructor, CFII, in a full flight simulator or flight training device, these are advanced flight training devices, right? A maximum of 30 hours may be performed in the full flight simulator or flight training device if the instrument time was completed in accordance with part 142 of this chapter, which we'd have to look at, or a maximum of 20 hours may be performed in that FTD if the instrument time was not completed in compliance with part 142. If you look up what 142 is, I guess we could just click on it and see. Training centers, we're not like a simulator training center, so I think the maximum we can use is 20 hours of sim.
So the other ones have to be under foggles?
Well, you're technically simulated instrument anytime you're flying a sim and the instructor puts the visibility to IMC that because you logged that as simulated instrument, right? Like last week, you and I did a flight and we logged all but 0.1 of it as simulated instrument. So that would be simulated instrument in a training device, right? So in an AATD, that counts, with no more than 20 hours of your 40 required, right? So you can do half. That's kind of a lot. These requirements are, but it works, right? I got my, like I told you, I got my instrument reading with a little more than 40 hours of simulated instrument, and it does work.
I'm assuming the 142 is like one of those airline.
I think so. I think it's like Flight Safety International. You go to Long Beach and you're paying extra money, and it's far more advanced than us. I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
And at Sling, we do more than the 20 hours because it goes to your commercial, right?
You can, but you're not required to.
Yeah, but that's kind of like the plan that.
Yeah. I mean, it also depends if you're 61 or 141. But yes. Yeah. Yeah. Also, like, you know, especially if you got more sim time left on your package, like it doesn't hurt. Yeah. As long as it's purposeful. Like I don't recommend just burning time for the sake of burning time. But there is always purposeful stuff to do on a simulator. Always. India, use of an aviation training device, a maximum of 10 hours of instrument time received in a basic aviation training device, that's our baby sim, or a maximum of 20 hours of instrument time received in an advanced aviation training device, that's all the rest of our sims, may be credited for the instrument time if the device is approved and authorized by the FAA. You notice there are letters of authorization taped to the side of each of our simulators. If you just bought a Redbird and put it in at home, you couldn't log it unless you got the special letter from the FAA. Also, if you do that, invite me over. I'm going to sim with you. An authorized instructor provides the instrument time in the device, right? So you got to do it with a double I. And the FAA approves the instrument training and instrument tasks performed in the device. So we cannot do any training in the basic. I haven't read the course of our letter. I don't know if that's maybe because the FAA doesn't approve for us to do it in the basic, or maybe it's because Sling just doesn't want instructors doing instruction in the basic and we reserve that for other uses. I don't know. But for our purposes, only time with the CFII in the advanced devices counts as training for that. So the biggest the biggest issues here typically are the long cross country, right? Forgot to land. You weren't under the foggles the whole time. You didn't file an IFR flight plan. It says that, right? You have to be under, this is a real IFR flight. This was actually the only quote, real IFR flight I did before my rating, right? It was the only time. It was not a VFR practice approach. It's gorgeous VMC day. But it was not a practice approach. They could not be like unable ILS runway 6 at San Bernardino. Like, nope, I am IFR flight plan. I'm landing IFR. They cannot make me cancel. So that's the biggest holdup there to be careful of, typically. Okay, let's talk about 141. This is in 14 CFR, appendix Charlie. Oops, 114 CFR 141. It's Charlie. Let's just do it this way. Title 14. This is all of Title 14, right? This is the FARs, the Federal Aviation Regulations. I'm looking for part 141, so I'm looking over here. Okay, 141 is going to be in this one, chapter 1. Let's open chapter 1. I'm looking for 141. It's going to be in subchapter H. Cool. 141. Where are my? There it is. 141. Appendix C. This is the instrument rating course. Major differences here, right? Let's look at differences between 61 and 141. Aeronautical knowledge. Each approved course must include at least the following. You need a 30-hour ground training course for part 141. So that means like in 61, right? It only said you needed to record ground training, but there was no time requirement. In 141, the 30-hour course. King Schools, I'm almost sure, will tell you in the endorsement, this is equivalent to 32.6 hours of whatever. That's for the part 141, folks. That's for the initial rating. Ground training must include the following knowledge areas, right? So the endorsement will also cite that. Very similar things to what, in fact, they might even be identical to part 61. Which makes sense, we're getting the same rating. Flight training. Each approved course must include at least the following flight training on the approved areas of operation in paragraph D of this section, appropriate instrument training. At least 35 hours of instrument training if it's for an initial rating. So that's 5 hours less total time, right? We needed 40 hours total time for 61. However, all 35 hours has to be training, right? Where 20 hours of the part 61 could be with a safety pilot. All 35 hours need to be with an instructor for part 141. Again, you're probably going to get all that with an instructor anyway. So to me, that's not a substantive difference.
Is it cheaper to get a safety pilot than a?
Not here, because you're paying the same, right? Like you already paid for your package if you're in the academy. So you're not, the instructor's included.
Yeah.
If you were at another school or you were a club student, there's like probably a different rate for the plain solo versus the plain plus instructor, in which case, yeah, it might be cheaper to not pay the instructor, but here it's already included. Take me with you. I want the hours too. I'm happy to fly with you.
And I feel like it's better to get training.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, towards your package. Yeah, if you have hours left in your package here, you can't rent separately. You can't be like, oh, today I want my flight to be on my rental account. No. Yeah, if you have hours left, that's where it's coming from. So those hours include an instructor. Take us with you.
Those hours don't go to waste. If you were to finish the course with less hours on your regular rate.
Yeah. Then you just apply those hours. You apply those leftover hours to your next rating. Like that one flight I did with the safety pilot, I sort of quote wasted that training, right? That was not dual received. That was just me with a safety pilot. That was a decision I made for one flight given the circumstances. But generally, to me, this difference is a difference without a distinction because of our setup here. For the use of simulators, you could use simulators. However, the credit for simulators is a little different. Advanced training device cannot exceed 40% of the total flight training hour requirements. So if our flight training requirements are 35 hours, 40% of those can be in the sim, which is 10% is 3.5 times 14 hours. Did we do mental math right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Very proud of myself for Monday morning. Credit for full flight simulators, we don't have that. Okay, that's Bravo. Charlie, each approved course must include the following. Instrument training time from a CFII on all the things in D, including at least one cross-country flight that is performed in the category and class of airplane that's approved, that the rating you're going for is a distance of at least 250 nautical miles along airways with at least one segment of the flight consisting of a straight line distance of 100 nautical miles. Involves an instrument approach at each airport and 3 different kinds of approaches. So the only difference here between 61 and 141 for the long cross country is that there's this new requirement that one segment of the cross country has to be at least a straight line distance of 100 miles. So it's no longer good enough to have just a 50 nautical mile cross country, check the box. One of the legs has to be 100 nautical miles. You know what the straight line distance is between here and Brown Municipal? It's like 100.7 or like 101.1. It's like exactly enough How do I know that? In my double A chuck ride, my examiner made me teach 141 Appendix C. So that's, you can still, whether you're 61 or 141, Torrance, Brown, 17 and back will count.
So it has to be an actual straight line?
No, just the straight line distance. So
Oh,
like, for
okay.
example, you could just open 4-flight, put KTOA, KSDM and see how far it is.
Oh, okay.
Just straight line, no other routing. That's what that means, yeah. Instrument helicopter, powered lift. Okay, and here's what you have to be trained on. Pre-flight prep, blah, blah, blah. Pre-flight prep, pre-flight procedures, ATC, this is very similar to 61, right? It's the same stuff. In part 141, we follow a syllabus. So the instructor will typically just say, all right, this was phase 2, lesson 3. We know exactly what that is, and that's how they'll typically endorse your logbook. Is that how it's been working for you, Leah? The instructor just endorses you with like a lesson number?
Yeah, usually he like rates everything that we do and then I have to put a pin in.
Yep, exactly. So the other thing about 141, the school is required, we are the actual like authority to say that you are ready for the check ride. In part 141, you get a graduation certificate when you're done with the course. The school, we, Sling, are in charge of making sure that you've met all the requirements. You get that graduation certificate, and then in your check ride, your 141 check ride, the examiner does not even really need to look at your logbook. All they need to see is your graduation certificate, and that they're basically believing, right? Because it's not their responsibility to check. Every 141 school has maybe some slightly different. We have our own approval from the FAA with some little differences here and there. So when Leah hands the certificate of graduation to the DPE is not really even going to need to see the logbook. Some endorsements, sure, but not the flight training and experience, because that's covered by the graduation certificate. Yeah. Stage checks and end of course tests. Cool. So what's the major difference then between 61 and 141 in instrument?
Hours.
Yeah, what kind of hours? No. Let's go back to 61 for a second.
Instruction?
A little bit. That is a difference, but the main one I'm thinking of, 61, 65. Yeah, cross country PIC. There is no cross country requirement other than this, the long cross country. There's no cross country hour requirement in instrument course in 141. So you basically all of that gets saved for commercial. I actually think that makes a lot of sense because it's commercial training where you're going to be doing
more cross country.
Yeah, like as a paid commercial pilot, to me that makes logical sense. It also means that you can get your instrument rating faster. So that's a major difference between 61 and 141.
Well, I see. Wouldn't it be harder for you? Not harder, but more like training wise, because once you get to commercial, you know nothing about cross countries. Because you haven't done them that much as if you were to be in 61.
I don't think so. And if that's true, I think that like the time to learn that is commercial. Yeah, I just think that makes more pedagogical sense. But the FAA has its reasons. I don't know why it's part 61 is written this way. It is. So my pitch for 141 is twofold. One, no cross-country requirement, no cross-country PSE requirement. And two, once we have 10 students who go through 141 in each course, so private, instrument, commercial, multi, CFI, CFII, we can apply to the FAA to get our own examining authority. Meaning, one of the chief or lead instructors here who's approved by the FAA does your check ride. And your final phase check is your check ride. There's no more DPEs, no more DPE fee, no more DPE waiting. We do your check ride. That's what we're trying to get to here. We need a few more students to pass 141. We need at least 10 in each course before we can apply for examining authority with the FAA.
Leah,
I know, Leah, you're doing God's work. Thank you. Thank you.
That's why they're starting now.
Yeah, and there is an argument to be made that the structured training, it's not perfect and you have to make your own decision, but there is some argument to be made that the structured training of 141 also is good pedagogically as well. I think there's like, I hear like rumbles and like I don't know, even other instructors are like, 141, blah, blah. I think it's because people don't really understand, or because people are maybe a little intimidated by the extra paperwork, or like the way Flight Schedule Pro is set up. It's a little more work on an instructor, not a ton to go in. I have to grade everything in the 141 land, but I did that with Part 61 anyway, so I don't think it's that much more work. And the advantage for y'all is that there's no logbook review. You get the certificate of completion, and once we get 10 people through each course, we can apply to the FAA and say we want to do our own check rides now. And once that happens, like I said, the DPE shortage no longer a problem. You're saving thousands and thousands of dollars on DPE fees. There's a lot of advantage.
So you'll be able to do the DPE for everything?
Once the FAA approves us to have examining authority, there'll be certain instructors who have to pass a test and apply, and the FAA will then approve us as check instructors, and then we can do basically your check ride. It would be the same as the final phase check, right? The final phase check is basically your check ride. You actually fill out an IACRA for it and everything. And then we go in and give you your cert. Yeah. Yeah. Cool, right?
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, 'cause
Sounds
I-
awesome, right?
I feel like it's less stressful too, because then
Yes.
you've been dealing, like, let's say you're one of those.
Yes.
And we've been dealing with you since the beginning, and then
Correct.
talking to you.
Yes.
As opposed to somebody who just came like yesterday, and you're like, oh shit, I don't know this guy. And then
Right.
So you'll react.
Right. Right. Helps with nerves, helps with everything, helps with money, helps with scheduling, all of that. If you're doing part 61 and you want to transfer into 141, you can apply most, if not all, of what you've already done in 61 to part 141. So I would just pitch to you all, think about it, right? You don't have to do it, but like think about it. Think hard, think about your situation, think about what makes sense to you. If you want to talk more about it, I'm happy to, or you can talk with your instructor. You can talk with Paul, who's the chief instructor, or Jim, anybody. We'd all be happy to talk to you. But I think that's I hear some like rumblings, 141. I just don't think it's warranted. I think there's some significant positives to 141 that, may not be right for everybody, but y'all should consider. That's my pitch.
Why is it that if you're 141, you need a 141 instructor?
Because the way that the our certificate of authorization from the FAA works, it says that, and I need some special training. I'm a 141 instructor. I needed special training to know, for example, like what's in our approved course. What does our syllabus look like? How do I use Flight Schedule Pro? Flight Schedule Pro basically becomes part of your logbook, right? Like when the school is trying to give you your certificate of graduation, they're looking at Flight Schedule Pro to see if you've done all the things and passed all the things properly. So there's a little bit of extra that I need. But that's it. It's not hard for any instructor to become part 141. It's a 2-hour ground class, and sometimes there's a flight required. But in my case, my eval flight for my hiring was with an instructor who was with Eric, and Eric's already 141 check, blah, blah, blah. So like it counted. And for Leah's case, since I'm 141, the ground training all counts. That's also important. Yeah. Great. All right. Thank you for listening. I look forward to talking with you all more about part 141, should you desire. Let's now move on to our second part of our agenda today, logging approaches. We haven't talked about this specifically, but I want to make sure we cover it. There is an info publication, Information for Operators, stylized like this, which I think is hilarious, but okay, FAA. This is info 15012, which I recommend you download and put in your IFR folder in ForeFlight for reference during your check ride and in life. An information for operators is a little similar to an advisory circular in that it does not necessarily carry the weight of regulation. What it does is it helps explain how to be compliant with regulations. It literally says that here. An info contains valuable information for operators that should help them meet certain administrative, regulatory, or operational requirements that have low urgency or impact on safety. So if this was a high safety thing, it would be upgraded to an advisory circular. But if it's not about safety, then it becomes an info. So the subject is, when can you log an instrument approach, right? For my 6 hits, my 66 hits, when can I log it? This is what it does. So discussion. 6157 Charlie 1 through 5 permits a pilot to use one of 4 methods to conduct and then log instrument approaches. 1, actual instrument flight conditions flown in an aircraft. If you are an actual IMC, that counts. In an aircraft, meaning as opposed to a simulator, that counts. Simulated IMC, using a view limiting device flown in an aircraft with a safety pilot. So that's you under the hood with a safety pilot in simulated instrument conditions. So far, not rocket science. Simulated instrument flight conditions conducted by in any FAA approved full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device. We have our AATDs, right? Our advanced aviation training devices, that counts. Or a combination of 1 through 3 as prescribed by 6157. But that's not really getting us to like the main point, which is like, okay, I know I have to be in IMC, either simulated or actual, but when? What if I pop out of the clouds before the final approach fix? What if I pop out of the clouds before minimums? When do I have to wear the foggles exactly? Do I have to wear the foggles all the way down to minimums? See why we needed info? This is what this is going to explain. So here's the meat of it. A pilot may log an IAP for currency or training when the pilot accomplishes the instrument approach with the following conditions. When conducted in an aircraft, flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device, the pilot must operate the aircraft or authorized training device solely by reference to instruments. Solely by reference to instruments. So that means you need to be in either actual IMC or simulated. And you need to be flying with reference to the instruments exclusively. When conducted, the pilot must be established on each required segment of the instrument approach procedure to the minimum descent altitude or the decision altitude. When conducted, you must do the procedure all the way to the MDA or the DA. So if you get to the final approach fix and you go down another 100 feet and you're still like 500 feet from your DA and you're like, cool, time to go missed, you cannot log that approach. You got to go down to minimums. Gotta go down to minimums. 3, simulated instrument meteorological conditions must continue to MDA or DA. Simulated. So if you're under the hood or if you're in the simulator, these simulated conditions have to continue all the way to minimums. So you must keep your foggles on all the way to minimums. So for example, if you're doing a simulated ILS into Torrance, 29 right, that gets you down pretty low. You have to wear the foggles all the way until the G3X says minimums, right? Because you've programmed in your minimums properly. And then your instructor says, my controls, take off your foggles, your controls, and then you land, okay? But that's required. You have to stay under the foggles all the way till minimums, right? It's simulating what would actually happen, proving that you can
Yeah, because
do
once
it.
you're at there, you see the runway, you're established.
Or you don't, in which case, what do? Missed, exactly, yep. When conducted in aircraft, the flight must be conducted under actual or simulated. Note, a pilot cannot log an instrument approach for currency without also logging actual or simulated instrument time. So if you are logging an approach, you have to have some kind of instrument time, either simulated or actual. I know that sounds obvious, but make sure in your logbook, whenever you are logging an approach for training or currency, you cannot log that you didn't have at least some simulated or actual. Otherwise, it's like you didn't. No, you can't just keep the foggles off and log the approach. No. Simulated instrument conditions occur when a pilot uses a view limiting for foggles or the hood to prevent the pilot from seeing outside. Right. Consequently, flight conducted under simulated conditions requires a safety pilot. So if you're doing it and it's not training, make sure you log what in your logbook? What do you have to put down? The safety pilot's certificate number,
Oh, his
No,
name,
their
date of birth,
full name.
just his full name.
certificate number, just their name. Safety pilot was XYZ. Yep, good. That's how you fulfill this requirement. They have to have the current medical, occupy the control seat, and be appropriately rated in the category and class. Pilot operating under simulated must also log the name of the safety. Oh, yeah, there. That's great. 5, when conducted in an aircraft maneuvering in IMC, so you're actually in the clouds, you're not under the hood. The aircraft transitions from IMC to VMC on the final approach segment prior to or upon reaching the minimums. So what this is saying is, say you're flying through the clouds, you're in the clouds at the final approach fix, but sometime after the final approach fix, but before minimums, you break out of the clouds. What then? Because I know simulated, I have to have the foggles on all the way to minimums, but oh crap, now I've broken out of the clouds before minimums.
Because it's
As long as it's after your final approach fix, you can log it. This is what it says, except when being radar vectored to the final approach course or otherwise directed through an appropriate ATC clearance to a specific instrument approach procedure, pilots must execute the entire procedure commencing at an initial approach fix or associated feeder route and fly the initial segment, the intermediate segment, and the final segment. If the pilot completes these segments or receive vectors to the final approach course, they may log the instrument approach. So what this is saying is, so the FAA does not require the ceiling to be at minimums during actual IMC. When flying in IMC, two outcomes are possible. The aircraft will transition from IMC to VMC to allow landing per my favorite regulation, 9175, or the aircraft will remain in IMC and execute the missed approach. In either case, the pilot may log the instrument approach. In either case. So even if you go missed, you can still log it. It may be obvious, but they're putting it down anyway. The main point here is that if you're in actuals, as long as you're in actual at the final approach fix and a little bit after, even if you break out, you can still log that. Simulated, no, you've got to have the hood on all the way to minimums. But in actuals, as long as you're in IMC at the final approach fix or a little bit after, and a little bit after, you can log it.
What's the except when being radar vectored?
So this is saying you have to fly the whole route starting from the initial approach fix. So it's saying you need to basically fly the whole thing. Like, you can't be like, all right, I'm only gonna fly the
So-
final approach fix and that's it.
Does that mean on clear sunny days, no one logging approaches?
No. How would they log an approach on a clear sunny day in VMC? How do we do it in training?
Follows down.
View limiting device, use the FAA's language, right? View limiting device. Toggles all the way to minimums. That's how you log it. Or in the simulator, we put it in simulated IMC basically the whole time.
But
So at least to minimums.
in commercial land,
Yeah,
do they just not log it then? Cause I don't. think-
correct.
So
Yeah,
they're ju-
all these planes logging at LAX once it's VMC. Yeah, those approaches don't count towards their currency. They don't count towards their currency.
Yeah.
They cannot lug those approaches.
But they're
So
also,
they'll,
they're also probably flying to Colorado and whatever.
Yeah, professional pilots are so much every.
Long Beach this morning.
They're having no problem with their
Yeah,
6
yeah.
hits.
Yeah.
And there may also be a provision of part 121 or 135 where that doesn't even apply,
Yeah,
right? But
I
like,
think there's a rule that as long as you're hired and they're like approved by the FAA and they're doing just so many flights.
that's part of the benefit of having an operating certificate. Potentially, I don't know for sure, but like, even if they were wanting to fly part 91 later, right? They're gonna go to their Mooney over in Hawthorne and like tool around and do some instrument approaches. Yeah, those approaches they do where they're not in actual and they're not under the foggles, they cannot log for currency.
So, I don't.
Yeah, go.
The cross-country example, like we're not landing.
Yeah.
Not landing and.
Yeah,
San Bernardino just come back.
yeah,
twice,
going missed.
0
Yeah,
nautical mile.
yeah.
We can still log the approach,
Oh, yeah.
even though we don't land.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
If, right, it says here, if you go missed, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
like, if you're gonna remain in IMC and execute missed, that counts. Or if you're gonna stay in simulated all the way to minimums and then at minimums you go missed and you stay under the hood, fine, loggable. Absolutely loggable.
and then that's what we do when some instructors take their students to Catalina, right? They'll follow the IFR to Catalina, stay under the foggles, go miss, they won't land. And when they come back, they log their like approach.
Well, it's not just Catalina. We do that with all of our training approaches because in a sling, we're not allowed to go into IMC. So they're all flown under simulated instrument with our foggles all the way to minimums. All the way to minimums. Yep. Sometimes Long Beach on the ILS 30 will tell you to go missed before minimums. Sometimes Fullerton will tell you to go missed before minimums. My interpretation is that counts per the FAA. What the FAA wants is for you to do the whole procedure. That's what they say. And I've never had a DPE question. I've been told to go missed on check rides, both instrument and double I, where they were told us to go missed before minimums. That still count. Because ATC told us, what are we gonna do? Say unable? I gotta go to minimums because I'm on a check ride? No.
So I haven't done any instrument flying training. yet.
Yeah.
When there's a student out there, do the instructors have them on foggles from like the taxiway up to the run up and they?
No,
You know,
no,
So
right
when
after you take off.
it's at some
so
point
you-
after. It's simulating, oh, we went into the clouds now. Oh, we're in the marine layer now. That's what we're simulating.
then that's when you pull.
You can't take off under the fogs. Just like you wouldn't take off with zero visibility.
0-0.
You could legally, but we're not gonna, you know? You're not gonna taxi in 0-0. We're not gonna. Right, yeah. So that's what, and then same on the way down, right? After you get to minimums, you take them off and then you land and taxi with not simulated. So that's the other thing about your logbooks that I would recommend, right? Like if you do a 1.4 Hobbs instrument training flight, you can't log 1.3 simulated, right? It's a 1.4 flight. You spent more than 6 minutes taxiing, run up, landing, taxiing again. So don't pull funny stuff. Like make your best estimate.
Yeah,
But-
you're gonna take away 0.2, 0.3.
Even more than that, like if you actually time it one time, actually see, but like usually it's 0.3 between startup and takeoff at least. And you remember the beginning of the climb, that's at least 18 minutes, right? That's 0.3 for takeoff. Maybe on the way back down, you could go from minimums at Torrance, minimums to landing to sling. I think that's more than 6 minutes typically. So that's 0.2. You're shaving off at least 0.5, probably 0.6 at least.
Do you know what 0.1 is equivalent to?
6 minutes.
Oh, okay. So
1/10 of an hour is 6 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The lawyers know that too. Isn't somebody an ex-lawyer in this class? Was it Leah? Are you an ex-lawyer? Somebody's an ex-lawyer. Maybe not. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Excellent.
Well, a recovering lawyer. A lot of people second career switchers here. So
They got the.
there's actually an amazing pilot in my flying club. She's a lawyer. Yeah. Really good to have around for stuff like interpretations of regulations and whatnot.
I busted Delta, I need your help.
Exactly. Okay, so info 15012. I do recommend download, put that in your for flight documents for a check ride.
Understand.
Sweet. Last thing for today, the instrument ACS. This should already be in your for flight.
The document.
In your documents. Okay, so let me get this to a place where I can see it better.
And I think you also mentioned that we need that if the DPA asks us about the currency after 12 kilotons, instrument proficiency check.
Correct. This is all in the ACS.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So I do want to do a little bit of a review here of the ACS. This is the whole guidebook to what's going to happen on your check ride. Nothing is going to happen in your check ride that's not in the ACS. No surprises. And the DPE, at least the one I use, Catherine Stanley, who I really respect, and I think she's a very fair DPE.
I heard she's stricter than the other one.
It's not been my experience. She's been extremely fair. I've never had a perfect check ride in any of my check rides, and I've always passed. And that's in 3 of them with Catherine Stanley. I did private, instrument, and commercial with Catherine Stanley. None of them were perfect. She was very young. She was very young. Interesting. Wow, that's cool. That's cool. I did my private with her in 2022 when she was still very new, and it was a hard check ride, but again, it was not perfect on the ground or in the air. She's very fair. We're going to look at why it doesn't have to be perfect here. I'm going to scroll first to the table of contents. Apologies if this is a little bit repetitive, but I think it's important for us to understand the rubric on which we're going to be graded for this rating. So I think the table of contents is actually a pretty good overview of this, right? First of all, they're going to tell us about what is the whole of this ACS concept. Then it has a bunch of what they call areas of operation. Each area of operation has different tasks inside of it. So area of operation 1 is all about pre-flight prep. Area of operation 2, pre-flight procedures. Area of operation 3, air traffic control. Does this sound familiar? Is this ringing a bell? Maybe some kind of, I don't know, federal aviation regulation? This is literally 6165 Delta or Charlie or whatever, right? Let's go back to that for a second. 6165, where it says you have to have aeronautical training in, it's Charlie. Pre-flight prep, flight procedures, air traffic control, flight bar references. It's literally mirrored in the ACS. It's literally the same. So that's how we get the ACS. The ACS starts from the FARs. So each area of operation corresponds to something in 6165 Charlie or 141 Appendix C. Okay. Within that, then it breaks it down into tasks. So you might ask, what's the difference between pre-flight prep and pre-flight procedures? Well, pre-flight prep is pilot quals, weather, and cross-country flight planning. Whereas the procedures, it's aircraft systems, aircraft flight instruments, nav equipment, and instrument flight deck check. Cool. It's all going to be laid out for us. So you can go and look at each task, at least the title, and get a sense of what's going to be expected in the check ride. We're going to have to comply with our ATC control clearances, holding procedures. We're going to have to fly by reference to instruments. We're going to have to recover from unusual flight attitudes. None of this is in the FARs, right? It says flight by reference to instruments, and then it's the ACS that tells you what exactly that means and what the standards are. What does it mean to intercept and track a navigational system and do DME arcs? It's going to tell us all the things, and then the procedures. And then it has some very helpful appendices. Appendix 1, practical test roles, responsibilities, and outcomes. We're going to look at that first. Safety of flight. And then this is going to be very important for us in the instrument world, the Appendix 3, aircraft equipment, operational requirements, and limitations. I'm going to skip all the area of operations for a second and go straight to the appendix, right? Eligibility requirements. This is basically renaming. You have to comply with Part 61. Why doesn't it talk about 141 here?
Is that because of the certificate you get?
141, once we get examining authority, is literally going to be what it says in the final phase check. And the final phase check will also have expectations of like, you know, you have to do the tolerances, right? Like this acceptable performance. It's all in the final phase check document. Until we get that examining authority, you have to use the ACS, which references Part 61. I don't think there's any real practical difference between the two, but I just want to point out that's why it's not talking about 141, because once we get examining authority, we're just going to do whatever the final phase check says, and that's it. That's it. Use of the ACS, I recommend you do read this. Your error codes from your written are going to match the ACS. So it'll say IR first, because that's the instrument rating. It'll say the Roman numeral of the area of operation, the task, and then the element. So when you get your score report from your written, just like you did in your private, the error codes are going to match the ACS. The DPE is required in the ground to cover all your miscodes. It's an incentive to do really well in the written. The DPE is required to cover all of your miscodes. So you can, as you're studying, make sure you're like golden on all your miscodes, because you're guaranteed to have to talk about that in your practice. Here's an important thing that the appendix says. There's no requirement for an evaluator to test every knowledge and risk management area in a task. Rather, the evaluator has discretion to sample as needed to ensure the applicant's mastery of that task. The required minimum elements to be tested from each applicable task include any elements in which the applicant was shown to be I just said that. If you have a miscode, you got to be tested. At least one knowledge, at least one risk management, and all the skills. What does that mean exactly? Let's look at one real quick.
So if you have a knowledge failure, he has to do it.
Yeah. So let's look, for example, at Area of Operation 6, Task A, non-precision approach. It's just an example. Here are the references for how they came up with what this is, right? FAA handbooks, as well as the FARs and the TERPS, Terminal Procedure publication. Objective of this is to determine the applicant exhibits satisfactory knowledge, risk management, and skills associated with performing a non-precision approach solely by reference to instruments. What's an example of a non-precision approach? Sophie, what's an example of a non-precision approach? VOR, what's another example? Lydia. GPS without vertical guidance, right? So if you're doing GPS on like an LNAV, for example, no vertical guidance, not an LPV approach, non-precision. Yeah, what's another example? Casey.
I'm going back to my notes.
Yeah, all good, all good. What's the definition of a precision approach? Maybe we'll start there. What do you need in order for it to be counted as precision? By where?
In the ground station.
From the ground station at the airport.
Yep.
Right. There we go, localizer, those are the big ones, right? Localizer, which is just lateral guidance, maybe the glide slope is out of service, maybe it doesn't have a glide slope. Maybe you're flying it, but you're ignoring the glide slope and you're flying it like a localizer. All good, all good. Yep, okay, good. So you're doing non-precision approach. You have to be able to do that. You're gonna be required to do at least one, spoiler alert, you're gonna be required to do 2 non-precision approaches on the check ride. Note, see Appendix 3 for information. We're gonna look at Appendix 3 next. But you can see that each part of the ACS has knowledge, risk management, and skills, each one. So you'll see that here is the error code, right? IR is for this instrument rating. 6 is the area of operation 6 instrument approach. And this is task alpha, knowledge 1. So the applicant has to demonstrate knowledge of procedures and limitations associated with a non-precision approach, including the differences between localizer performance and lateral navigation approach guidance. Cool. So on Thursday and Friday, when we're doing our mock check rides, I'm going to ask about that. Okay. Navigation system indications and enunciations. Ground-based and satellite-based nav systems and use for their non-precision approaches. A stabilized approach, including energy management. Then you have risk management. What's the risk in deviating from the assigned procedure? Selecting a nav frequency, management of the automation, etc., etc. And then lastly, and this is probably the part that we're most focused on a check ride, the skills, right? Because the ACS just told us they don't necessarily have to check every knowledge and every risk management. They have to check our miscodes. They don't have to do every single one, just until they're satisfied that we know, just until they're satisfied that we're safe with our risk management. They don't have to do every single one. They do have to do every single skill. So you're gonna have to accomplish a non-precision approach as selected by the evaluator. They get to pick. Show me the VOR alpha at Fullerton. Show me the VOR 30 at Long Beach. Show me the localizer 30 at Long Beach. They get to pick. You have to be prepared to do any of it. Show me the VOR alpha at Catalina. They get to pick. Yep. 2, establish two-way communications with ATC appropriate for the phase of flight and use proper communication phraseology. Sling 805 Alpha Zulu. Yeah, can we get a we'd like to go into the practice the GP. No, you failed the skill. You got to be able to talk on the radio.
So the check ride won't be under an instrument flight rule or like an instrument.
No, you won't follow a flight plan. You'll plan a cross country, and the ground will be based on that. Unlike the private or the commercial, you will not actually fly that cross country.
None of it.
None of it. In private and commercial, you start, and then they're like, "Oh my god, a diversion!" Because the ACS says you have to do a diversion. It's like, wow, big shocker! I had to divert to Compton. I'm so unprepared for that.
Yeah.
But an instrument, you don't even pretend because there's no requirement for a diversion, so you don't do that. Thank you for catching on to my sarcasm. Select, tune, and identify and confirm the operational status of nav equipment to be used for the approach. This is important. If you tune in the VOR or you turn in the localizer and you fail to verify that it's working, you fail this skill. And they could fail you on that approach, and then you fail the check ride. So don't overlook verbalizing. All right, we're going to turn on the Morse code, and I'm going to check the Morse code. And then be referencing what the Morse code should be. Don't just be listening for dots and dashes. It says on the approach plate in pictures what it should be. If I don't have that up, if the examiner is just like, what, you're listening to, what if you tune in Seal Beach and now you're listening to Seal Beach? You're more fluent in Morse code, and then they're going to test you in Morse code, right? Like, so I don't think any of us are, so be looking. The way I do it is I zoom in real big on my approach plate, so it's very obvious. I'm like, I'm looking at, or I'll even more say, verbalizing. I'm referencing the Morse code here. Just don't leave anything to chance.
Are you able to take out low IFR charts on the Garmin?
Yeah. Anybody know how to switch to low IFR on the Garmin G3X? Menu. I can't remember if you press it once or twice. Menu, and then I think it's the first menu when you're on the map. So scroll to the map first, menu, then chart options. You can switch to the IFR low. I do recommend that for IFR training and the check ride. Yeah.
And then, like you said, we had to be able to select, tune, and identify. That's like saying we see ID and they're like, oh yeah, ID, it's identified. They're like, no, right?
No, it's not. Yeah, seeing ID does not mean it's identified.
It means
If you
it's
see the code in the top middle of the box,
that's
it means the GTN 650 has identified it. Verbalize that out loud. Don't let the DPE wonder. You say, All right, I see that the GTN 650 is showing in the middle of the top box, that I-TOA, the localizer is identified and operational. Literally, that's all that this skill says. If you don't do that, you risk failing the check ride. Yeah. Also in real life, reason it's on this is because we need you that in real life. It's not just a check ride skill, it's an IFR flying skill. Comply with all clearances. So do what ATC tells you or the evaluator tells you. Recognize if any flight instrumentation is inaccurate, inoperative, and take appropriate action. I think I told you the story in my double-A check ride when Seal Beach VOR all of a sudden was not working, and there was no course deviation indicator, and there was no Morse code. Cool. Recognize it, make a different plan. Advise ATC or the evaluator if you're unable to comply with what they tell you, and complete the appropriate checklist. Complete the appropriate checklist is always on every single one. Here we go. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Establish the appropriate aircraft configuration and airspeed, considering the weather and operating conditions. Maintain an altitude plus or minus 100 feet. Selected heading plus or minus 10 degrees. Airspeed plus or minus 10 knots. And no more than 3/4 scale CDI deflection. Accurately track radials, courses, or bearings prior to beginning the final approach segment. So before the final approach segment, those are the tolerances for your IFR flying, plus or minus 100 feet, plus or minus 10 degrees on heading, plus or minus 10 knots of airspeed. And that's for basically all of the instrument flying, right? That's your tolerance. So if I'm out flying with you or in the sim, I'm gonna let you get 100 feet off your altitude before I say altitude. But that's a sign that your scan got slow or something. Adjust the published MDA and visibility criteria for the aircraft approach category as appropriate, and no TAMs, inoperative equipment or inoperative visual aids. So you know how some approaches say if the approach lighting system isn't working, add 40 feet. Jepson helps us with that because they have it right there. Or if you don't have the local altimeter setting, increase your MDA by whatever feet. But Jepson helps us with that by having, like, that's, you got to do all that. There's a no TAM for the VOR 30 at Long Beach, increasing the MDA for circling. I think all the circling approaches at Long Beach have a no TAM for that now because there's a crane. You got to make sure you adjust for that. Establish a stabilized descent, no more than 1,000 feet a minute, no wild maneuvers, no S turns, no slips. And for the final approach segment, here's different requirements. Maintain no more than 3/4 scale CDI deflection, airspeed plus or minus 10 knots, and altitude, if applicable, above MDA plus 100 minus 0 to the visual descent point or missed approach point. Remember, this is a non-precision approach, so we have an MDA. So it's saying you can be at MDA plus 100, but minus 0. While you're on your way to the final approach, plus or minus 100, doesn't matter. But after final approach, for the final approach segment, MDA, do not go 1 foot below MDA. It's okay to level off 10 feet above. It's okay to level off 20 feet above. Say it out loud. I'm going to level off 20 feet above. I'm going to level off 30 feet above. What? Just say it so the DPE knows. But do not go below, not even 1 foot. 3/4 scale deflection just means exactly what it says, right? Your needle, this is full deflection, so 3/4 is the way there. There's actually quite a bit of tolerance, right? As long as your scan is going well and you're catching it before things get way out of whack, that's fairly easy to do, to keep that within 3/4 scale is, I'd say, a generous margin. Cool. Assess if the required visual references are available. Do I have what's required in 91-175? Do I have one of the 10 things? And either initiate the missed approach or continue for landing. Use an MFD or other graphical navigation displays if installed to monitor position, track wind drift, and to maintain situational awareness. So you using your moving map, either on the G3X or the GTN 650 or both, and use single pilot resource management or crew resource management as appropriate. That's task A. That's your, non-precision approach. Literally. So the skills area is really where the rubber hits the road. Knowledge and risk management is going to be covered, at least one in each category, plus all your missed codes in the ground. Now you'll remember it said, note, see Appendix 3 for information related to this task. Shall we go there? Yes, we shall. Here's Appendix 3. Aircraft requirements for the check ride, equipment for the check ride, use of a flight simulator, pilot, blah, 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 blah. Operational requirements, limitations. So here's the notes on navigation systems. Here's notes on instrument approach procedures. Good. Here's task A, right? It said here's the note, and task A was non-precision approach. The non-precision approach is a standard instrument approach to a published MDA without approved vertical guidance. That's literally what Casey just said. The applicant may use navigation systems that display advisory vertical guidance during non-precision operations if available. If you're flying a GPS approach with LNAV, right? You fail your WAS, you're flying an LNAV approach GPS. The GTN 650 is so smart, it'll still give you an advisory glide path. This is saying, that's cool, that's fine. You still got to follow all the normal MDAs and procedures, but you can't like not use the GTN 650 anymore just because it's giving you advisory vertical guidance. The evaluator must select and the applicant must accomplish at least 2 different non-precision approaches. This is where it says deep in the appendix 3, you're gonna have to do 2 non-precision approaches in simulated or actual IMC. At least one procedure must include a course reversal maneuver. So that's either a hold in lieu or a procedure turn. The applicant must accomplish at least one of these non-precision approaches from an initial approach fix without the use of autopilot and without the use of radar vectors. During this flying task, flying without the use of autopilot does not prevent the use of yaw damper or flight director. So the flight director turned on, but you cannot be using the autopilot to actually fly the airplane. The applicant must fly at least one of these non-precision approaches with reference to backup or partial panel instrumentation or navigation display, depending on the aircraft's instrumentation avionics, representing a realistic failure mode for the equipment used. So in our case, that means failed the G3X. It's actually kind of cool because then we have a whole primary flight display still in the G5. We're very lucky. If we were in a 6-pack, they would just like cover up the attitude indicator or something. I think that's a lot harder than our situation. But for us, partial panel means cover the left side of the G3X, all your primary flight display. Yeah.
The one that you just read about yaw damper and a flight director.
Yeah, this one.
Does that mean we can use flight director?
Yes. Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes. It's awesome. As long as you have your GTN 650 programmed properly, and as long as you're in the correct autopilot mode. Chris and I were experimenting with this in the simulator last week, right? If you're flying a hold and you don't have the hold programmed in the GTN 650, well, then your flight director is not going to know you're going to be in a hold. So you can't rely exclusively on it.
We were switching it when we were on the outbound, we were doing heading mode.
Correct.
And then when we went into the inbound, we're switching it to
Nav mode or VOR. You were doing a VOR hold. Yeah. You can program holds into the GTN 650 and then you just put it on nav mode. My double I check ride, I flew the whole hold. I did the whole course reversal on nav mode GPS. The CF PTS, which is not, they haven't made an ACS for the double I check ride yet, but it says same thing here. You only have to do one approach using hand flying. So some examiners are like, cool, use the autopilot as much as you want. Some examiners are like, you do one with the autopilot and the others hand fly. Be prepared for that. You are required to use the autopilot if it has one. You have to be required to know how to use it. So if you haven't done autopilot approaches to minimums, you will need to do that before your check ride too. It'll say that somewhere else in this appendix. Evaluator has discretion to have the applicant perform a landing or a missed approach at the end of each approach. So to land, you can go miss. The evaluator can decide. So of these approaches, 2 of them are non-precision, right? These are 2 non-precision approaches. One has to include a course reversal, and one has to be flown partial panel, no autopilot. So when you're thinking about, okay, what might my check ride look like? Well, this is partly why it's not a big like mystery which approaches there might be, because when you put these requirements on it and then you look at what's within like a reasonable distance, there aren't that many sort of combinations that can make this work. The VOR Alpha at Fullerton has a course reversal, right? The VOR 30 at Long Beach has a hold and loop. The ILS and the localizer, right? ILS would be precision, but the localizer would be the non-precision. The localizer has a hold and loop. You're gonna have to potentially fly that. So in your training, what I recommend with your flight instructor is like, get in the head of the ACS. It tells you what you're gonna have to do. Make sure you've flown a course reversal on the localizer ILS, on the localizer 30 at Long Beach once. You can get tested on it. See what I mean?
Yeah.
When it comes to partial panel, Don't be doing partial panel on your precision approach. The partial panel has to happen on a non-precision approach for the ACS. There's no point in doing, well, not that there's no point. I think it's more realistic to do partial panel practice on a non-precision approach because the ACS, you're gonna have to do that on your check.
Kind of interesting story
Yeah.
related to that.
Yeah.
Before my cross-country face check, me and my instructor, we've been practicing diversion to Fullerton.
Mhm.
And he told me, just plan to go to San Bernardino. He's gonna divert you to Fullerton. And he diverted to Corona.
See, there you go.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias and everything else. Yeah, exactly. You know, are there DPEs that will take you to Hawthorne for an approach on your check ride? Sure. Are there DPEs that are gonna take you to Corona for the VOR into Corona? Sure. Are there
So just go
DPEs that are gonna take you and do an approach into Seal Beach? I don't mean the VOR, I mean the Army Air Station. Yes.
Well, you can do an approach to the,
Can't land, but you can do an approach.
so you can go down all the way to miss and you're like, oh, miss.
Yep.
Oh, did that?
Yeah, that's kind of like,
The approach plate also looks a little different because it's a military approach plate. But yeah, you can absolutely do that. I've only done it in the sim. I haven't done it in real life. But you know, again, some of these approaches, you don't want to burn the Hobbs time, go all the way to Corona. Get on sim. Get on sim and do it in sim with your instructor. You need sim time anyway, right? You can use whatever 14 or 20 hours, depending on which you're in 41, 141 or 61. Go to Corona.
Proflight actually tells you as well how many hours you need to complete.
Yeah, but be careful with those reports. My word of caution is garbage in, garbage out. So if you made a mistake, for example, in logging some of your cross-country time, well, ForeFlight doesn't know that. For instrument, it seems to be okay, but if you were my student, I would still make you go through your 2-page report and show me how it all adds up. Because that's what the DP is going to do. DP can't look at a ForeFlight, log and be like, or a ForeFlight report on seeing green check marks on the instrument check ride and be like, yeah, cool, I fulfilled my responsibilities as an examiner. You're definitely going to want to see the entries. In commercial, it gets even a little more wonky because of the way that we have to log night. And we talked briefly on Friday about the difference between PDPIC, performing the duties of pilot and command for your long cross country, night landings, and not only night landings, but the tower has to be operational. Well, ForeFlight doesn't know if the tower was operational, so you got to be a little careful. You got to be very careful. Cool. While we're here, let's look at the precision approach notes. You must do a precision approach to the DA using all the equipment for centerline and vertical guidance in simulated or actual. Precision approach is defined as an instrument approach to published decision altitude using provided approved vertical guidance. So while a GPS LPV approach, legally in terms of alternates and everything else, is non-precision, the ACS says that an LPV approach counts for the purposes of the ACS as a precision approach. One sentence in the appendix. One sentence. Let's scroll up a little bit. Let's look at nav systems, right? This is operational requirements for task area of operation 5, navigation systems. Task A, intercepting and tracking DME arcs. The evaluator may not select DME arcs unless they are charted and available, including the use of RNAV substitution techniques if appropriate. Evaluator may not tell you to do an arc unless charted and available.
Oh, so it's not like on the sim, you know how you gave me an arc, it was anywhere.
Yeah, and when you're practicing in the air, your instructor is going to make one up for you.
He can't do.
The evaluator cannot do that. It has to be charted.
So if we won't do an arc conversion, right?
You would not do an arc.
Nice.
At least I'm not aware of any arcs that are charted nearby. So don't stress about arcs. Know how to fly it. Obviously, you need to know how to do it.
So how do you get
not gonna do that.
evaluated on a DME?
Well, let's go look at area of operation 5, task A. So they're still going to evaluate you on it. Area of operation 5, task A. Knowledge. They're going to test you on things like, do you know about how the arcs work? Talk me through intercepting one. Maybe they give you an approach plate that has an arc and they'll be like, you're here. How do you intercept the arc? Walk me through every step. They might do that. Satellite-based navigation, including WAS, same thing. Like, oh, you're You are failed. Can you still fly this arc? How? They ask you that. Risk management. They would ask you things like, what if your so-and-so fails? What if your autopilot fails? Distractions, limitations of the system in use. They could ask you questions on all that. And then they could ask you about the skills too. They're probably not going to. Look, the skill here, airspeed plus or minus 10 knots, altitude plus or minus 100 feet, selected heading plus or minus 5 or not, or tracking navigation systems. Apply proper wind correction, allowing no more than 3/4 scale deflection to the CDI. If you're doing a DME, you and I looked this up, I think the other day. No, it was actually me and Cass. The arc, you have to be plus or minus 1 nautical mile from the arc, which is a massive margin of error. The 3/4 scale deflection is also very generous, and then they give you a mile to be off from the arc.
We want your pass.
He also gives you a sense of like when the FAA chart designers are doing protected areas for arcs, it's probably 4 miles on each side or something. It's probably the same width as an air. It'll say in the instrument procedures handbook exactly, but there's got to be a huge protected area. So that's a very wide margin. Anyway, so to answer your question, yeah, they could still ask you about arcs. They could show you have you pull up an approach plate with an arc and ask you questions, but you're not going to fly it around here because I'm not aware of any that are charted. See, this is why it pays to know the ACS, because then you can
Now you know their playbook.
yeah, exactly. And you know what to focus on and what not to, you know? Aircraft requirements and limitations. Let's see. If the applicant has trained using a portable electronic flight bag, aka ForeFlight, and wishes to use that during the practical test, you're expected to demonstrate appropriate knowledge, risk management, and skills applicable to its use. What does that mean? It means the examiner could say to you, your iPad overheated, turn it off. And you got to be able to keep going. That's a limitation of its use. Your iPad ran out of battery, turn it off, fly the approach.
No, connected to power all the time.
Right? What would you do?
Plug your phone.
Thank you. You do not already have ForeFlight on your phone, updated, all your charts downloaded, everything. Have it. Before your check ride, double check.
But he's just gonna put it. Oh, you put it on your phone. Oh, your phone is there too.
In which case, what would you do?
I brought my mom's to my.
See? See?
Actually,
Yeah, I did.
That's as long as you're logged into ForeFlight. And if you're logged into ForeFlight, right, and you've got all the charts downloaded, that's legal. There's one other big resource we have though.
Big
It's
chart.
fancy. You can actually access all the charts too in the approach points.
Double click menu. Put a map.
Scroll to God, I think airport, and then press procedures. I forget exactly how to do it. I've done it only
It's-
rarely.
Once you get to like one page, it starts to like really be self-explanatory.
Yeah,
I don't remember
I
exactly.
think it starts on the airport page.
But then
Or waypoint.
like
Maybe waypoint and then airport.
Yeah.
the most obvious answer would be right now the stuff, right?
No, because you don't know what approaches you're gonna have. You find out at the end of your ground. The end of your ground, the evaluator is like, congratulations, you've passed the ground, and then you go. And
Let me
then
take a 10-minute break.
no, literally, and you're allowed to take as many breaks as you want. You know? You're even allowed to discontinue if you're not feeling well, you're too exhausted. You're allowed to discontinue. But they're not going to brief you on what you're going to do till the end of your ground. So you can't have everything printed out in advance. No, the answer is back up the electronic flight bag in your phone plus the G3X. But be aware, they could do that. You have to bring your own foggles. Okay. Where does it say? Here it goes. To assist in management of the aircraft during the practical test, you are expected to demonstrate automation management skills by using the installed, available, or airborne equipment such as autopilot, avionics, and systems displays and/or flight management system. The evaluator is expected to test your knowledge of those systems, both installed and that are installed and operative during the ground and flight portions of the test. If you've, we just read that sentence. So this says you have an autopilot, you have to use it. That's what that says. So that's why, even though it doesn't say earlier in the ACS, like, hey, one of these approaches has to be full with autopilot, many, if not all examiners are going to require you to do an approach on it. They want you to know. They want to know that you know these.
Right, and then Like you said about our iPads overheating.
Yeah.
The same can go for our Garmin, right? Oh, your Garmin went out. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we're simulating when we're doing partial panel, right? That our G3X broke.
Also, we're using the tiny ones.
Yeah, the G5. Yeah, yeah. Partial panel in the sling is cover up the left side, all the primary flight displays
Oh,
of the G3X. Some instructors or evaluators will actually turn the backlight down all the way to simulate the whole screen going blank. I'm not a huge fan of that myself because then we lose our engine instrumentation. So Catherine Stanley actually brought this really cool thing. She brought like this like weighted pillow, like folded like beads, and she used a binder clip to clip it to the top of the glare shield, so it only covered the left side of the G3X. We still had our engine instruments. Like, I need to get one of those for my students.
so there's a way you can make the engine instrument your whole thing or the chart the whole thing. No? Oh no.
No, because Garmin knows that you need your primary flight instruments. It will not let you hide your primary flight instruments. Will not let you. That's how you find your the one you can get rid of the NFD and use prime, you know,
And then make it
the whole screen, your primary flight instruments. You can even turn on synthetic vision.
That's the one with the terrain stuff. Right?
Yeah, buildings, but you cannot hide your primary flight display using features of, you have to physically block it or turn down the backlight.
If you were to do that,
Yeah.
does the G5 tell you the glide slope and the local?
Yes, so down here will be the glide slope, and right here will be, sorry, the localizer. And up here will be the glide slope, same as it looks over here.
Oh, the four bubbles are.
Yeah, they're just gonna be replicated over here.
Would you do anything to the G5 to activate that, or is that
Oh.
automatically
The
activated?
G5 is constantly using its own ADARs to calculate all of your stuff.
Didn't even land.
Yeah. No, we're so lucky, like, if we're doing this in like a 6-pack Cessna, like, could you imagine having to do the whole approach, like, with everything except your attitude indicator? Totally doable. That's a realistic failure mode in a Cessna. Our realistic failure mode, we're so lucky, is to literally have every single other flight instrument available. So it's just, time your screen.
Well, the only
After flying both, it makes me mad that we can't fly these in IMC. But I
Oh, it's
I-
ridiculous.
That's Cessna.
Correct. Yeah, with its vacuum, its engine driven vacuum pump from
Yeah.
1992. Yeah.
And like,
Mhm.
it's like 6 flights.
Yeah, exactly.
fingers crossed that they changed the like.
Yeah, Mosaic is supposedly coming. I'm not holding my breath, but Mosaic is supposedly. So here's my homework for y'all. Read the ACS. Read the ACS. We went through one area of operation and one task we went through one task together, right? We went through area of operation 6, task A, just for non-precision approach.
Just one.
That was just one task that we went through, plus some appendix, right? Because it referenced us to the appendix. But read every word of the ACS, and that's going to be your guide for the whole thing. It'll tell you all of your things. Circling approach. Remember, I told you have to do a circling approach because it's in here. Task D. What's the skills? Well, you have to do it. Maintain your airspeed plus or minus 10 knots. Desired track and heading plus or minus 10 degrees. And altitude plus 100 minus 0 of the MDA. Right? It tells you exactly. If landing, initiate a stabilized descent, touchdown on the first 1/3 of the runway without excessive maneuvering, without exceeding normal operating limits, and without exceeding 30 degrees of bank. That's another part of the
Is the
stabilized
ACS the one that DP uses that like he'll pick and choose different ones? He won't go through all of them. He'll just pick and choose.
Well-
Is that the one that Sling provides?
No, this is the one that this is what the DPE is required to use, is the ACS. This is the one that the DPE is required to use. Some ACSs, they can pick and choose, but an instrument, they have to do all of them.
Oh, okay. So it's not like the PPO where like they give the whole list and then I'll pick two from this one and then pick.
No, if that's the case, it'll say it up here at the top of the area of operation. Like the CFI ACS is like that a lot. It's like pick task B and Echo and one other one. No, the instrument ACS, you're doing all of them. And in some cases, right, like the non-precision approach, you're actually doing task A twice. Once partial panel and once with a procedure turn, right? You have to one with a procedure turn, once partial panel.
You said how long?
Might be the same. With Catherine, to go back and look at my notes. If any of you are gonna do the check ride with Catherine, I have a pretty extensive write-up that I did that I'm happy to share with you. I wrote it down in there. It was more than an hour and a half, but less than 2 hours, if my memory's right.
Okay.
That's pretty standard.
Yeah, that's like an average.
That's pretty standard.
It might, yeah.
It's pretty standard. ACS, that's the ACS. Tomorrow, arcs and holds. I know some of you have already passed arcs and holds. So think of this as review because the stuff we covered in arcs and holds is going to reappear for you on your final. It's going to reappear on your check ride. Then on Wednesday approaches Thursday, Friday.
Is that on the simulator or do we actually go on go to arts and Holds?
In the plane. It's a ground portion and then a plane portion. Yeah. Any questions? Go team. Thank you for being the brave 7 a.m. crew, including you online folks. Appreciate you all. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye. Yeah, let me double check that.